Welcome back, everybody, to a Little Less Fear podcast. I would like to welcome back our next guest is Tina Erwin. This is her second time here on a Little Less Fear podcast. Last episode was on episode 162. It was an incredible podcast, and she's just a really amazing woman that's taught me and all our listeners a lot. She studied metaphysics all her life, gaining insight into the metaphysical, the mystical world of magic and spirituality. She is the author of 8 books on metaphysics. Her writing comes from an intense desire to know and understand the hard science behind the unseen world of action and reaction, combined with a sincere desire to share this understanding with other knowledge seekers. So welcome back, Tina. This is amazing. Our last episode, we got to talk a lot about the unseen world, what happens when we die. And today we're going to talk about karma, which is a really important topic for many people. I studied it in Buddhism, and I felt lost, honestly, even going through such an intense chapter, even though it does come from a holy person in a holy place. There were just so many questions that felt uneasy for me to ask the monk and even feel into it. I didn't want to question their authority or anything like that. But stepping in and stepping out, I can now ask you, the expert, some questions about karma. But before we go there, welcome back to a Little Less Fear podcast.
Thank you so much. I love being on your show. It's a blast.
Thanks, Tina. I'm glad you feel so. I love having you here too. So what got you so fascinated in karma? Was this a coincidence, or was it just actually some of the stuff that you went through when discovering things that were unseen for you?
It's all, when you study metaphysics, there is nothing that isn't connected to metaphysics. And everything goes back to karma, whether you think it should or not, it does. Because karma is nothing but an active example of the law of physics. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. The difficulty with karma is that if you hit your hand with a hammer, the reaction is pain.
Right.
That's what people would call instant karma. But sometimes the karma that you incur can take lifetimes to play out. Sometimes you would not want that karma to come back and hit you all at once. And sometimes there are factors in mitigation when it comes to karma. And what does that mean?
Yeah, what does
some
that
things
mean?
Some things are not black and white. It's not an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth, and we're blind and we can't eat.
Right.
It's far more complicated than that. And one of the things that I learned is that the concept of karma never wastes any energy moment. What
I'm sorry, Tina.
An opportunity to learn. So if you think, oh my God, why do I have the karma of this experience? Well, what did you learn from the experience?
Tina, can we go back
Why
when you
is
actually
that
cut out?
experience?
You cut out at karma
Okay.
is, yeah, you cut out about 30 seconds ago. Something about, I'm gonna have to write this down. Karma is, and then that's where you cut out.
Karma is always an opportunity. If you have a situation with a difficult boss, is there anything about that difficult boss that's familiar? Let's say your difficult boss is a bully. Okay. When you grew up, was there someone in your life who was a bully? And if so, if the answer is yes, how did you deal with it? Or were you unable to deal with it? So one of the beauties of karma is you get many, many, many opportunities to come face to face with the action you can take to deal with something.
Okay.
If you're a person who's terrified to stand up and you can't find your voice, karma is going to continue to give you, sometimes you feel like you are shoved into a situation where you have to exercise your voice. You have to stand up and say something. And currently we are in a time where karma is placing us squarely in front of this giant question that says, what are your ethics? What is your truth? And if your truth
Right.
isn't who you want to be, then you need to do something about it. You need to make it right. And karma will always give you an opportunity to do that. And so if you have a boss that you could, if you had a bully in your life over and over and over, and you never stood up to the bully, and you finally have this boss who's a bully, and you still feel that pressure, if you do something about it, then you're going to be able to shift your own karma right in front of you in that lifetime. Because we all have to stand up to a bully at some point in our lives. Nobody's going to escape that. Mm-hmm. Stand up for what's right or defend somebody else. Sometimes the lessons are really, really hard. And sometimes they offer us enormous, enormous opportunity. And I had a client one time who was with a husband who had, one affair after the other. This man was jaw-droppingly good looking. He looked like he could have been, the male lead on the Old Spice commercials, that craggy look, that blonde. Oh my gosh, he was just so good looking. And he told her that the reason he had so many affairs was because his Kundalini was rising. And I said, there's a lot of things rising, but I'm not quite sure it's Kundalini, but could be something else. She said, well, I'm working through it. I mean, this woman worked really hard on her spiritual path. She was genuine to it. And what she decided, and, as we talked and worked, what she realized was that he was an opportunity to say no to being abused and betrayed. Mm-hmm. And she said, all right, so I met the opportunity. We're divorced. It's been extremely amicable. I haven't said anything negative about him. And I wish him well. We aren't meant to be married. So be it. But her question was, do I have to come back in another life and be married to him again?
It's a good question.
And do I have to go through this again and again? And I said, well, I'm not one of the lords of karma, so it's not like I get to make these decisions.
Right.
I'm just this ordinary mortal, also on a path.
Sure.
But the observation I would make is you understand that he was your opportunity. You accepted the opportunity. You took appropriate action. You've wished him well. You've moved on. You've identified to yourself you will no longer be abused by someone. You're building a different life. You turned a karmic corner.
Ooh, I like that.
And she said, well, do I have to come back with him? And I said, no. He will come back very probably because he was, kind of a classic narcissist. He wasn't a mean man. He was very narcissistic.
Sure.
It's always about what he wanted it and what his needs were. Okay. He will be an opportunity for someone else to learn that lesson. She will go on to a different lesson. And I said, that is the stock answer. I don't know what your whole karmic path is, but in this as an example, you have shifted something major. Oh, yeah. And this is true for women. And I'm using women as an example because they'll stay with a man who beats them over and over and over. I mean, client after client after client whose mother stayed with a man who beat them or raped them. Didn't matter. She would try to leave, but she would never fully leave. Mm-hmm. Karma wants to know, what's your courage?
Oh, I like that.
How about the C's here?
Sure, bless you.
Excuse me.
Bless you. Mm. Karma wants to know, what is your courage?
Do you have the courage to stand up and say, I'm not going to do this any longer. I'm making a different choice. Even if everyone tells you you're wrong. We've certainly seen that in the last 3 years. People who knew certain things to the core of their being, or that little voice that said, don't trust this or that. They didn't trust it and they turned out to be right. it's part of a spiritual path is learning to hear the inner voice. The inner voice may very well be that karmic opportunity for you to learn something. Suppose you had a mother-in-law who abused you, and every time you were married to her son, because a lot of times we get to play out the same dramas we've had.
You mean when you say we get to, you mean within the same life or life after life, or both?
Life after life.
Okay.
And your anger and frustration are so huge with this woman, and she can't stand you either. It's mutual. But oh my God.
Yeah,
she loves her son,
often.
And you love her, and you love your husband. So now how does karma is not going to waste the energy. Karma is giving each side an opportunity, all the players, an opportunity to have it play out differently.
For everybody involved.
For everybody involved.
Okay.
And once that happens, the entire karmic path can be shifted. And that actually happened to me. I knew that my mother-in-law had been responsible for my death in a previous life.
Oh my goodness.
And my husband was my husband. There were 4 different family members that had a regression. They all saw the same thing, and 4 different regressions. Nobody knew anything about the others. So the confirmation was pretty significant. And, the day I was to meet her, I just started vomiting because my subconscious doesn't recognize, anybody's subconscious doesn't recognize how many thousands of years or hundreds of years have passed. All you know is that something about this person is making you physically and emotionally uncomfortable. And everything about her filled me with rage. Everything about me filled her with rage. That's an untenable situation, and my husband's caught in the middle. How is this going to play out?
Right.
And I'm sharing this because, I'm not sitting on some cloud, not having experiences as well. A lot of wisdom comes from hard-won lessons. In this case, karma's going, oh my gosh, we have some amazing opportunities here. How will this play out? And what happened was we had a major drama that I won't go into that was so alarming for me that I cut off all contact with her for 14 years because I didn't like who I was when she was around. It's like the Incredible Hulk came out. It's like I look in the mirror and I go, I don't know who you are, but you're not the person you think you are. And so I worked with a spiritual teacher, and he said, you have to get this right. How many lifetimes do you want to come back with this woman?
Right.
And I said, I don't want to do this anymore. And he said, then you have to come to terms with it. He said, she doesn't have the insight to do it. So it's you who has to change. You have to make a big shift, and you have to figure it out. And I wasn't happy with that answer.
Right.
Because I'm ordinary and mortal and human. And I pondered it for some time, and I really, really, really struggled. And I realized that because she'd caused my death, I was afraid. I was afraid to be anywhere near her. And so what we did was we made an overture to her saying we would like to, my husband and I, because he went through a process with me of trying to reconcile this. And we said we would like to start a relationship again slowly. And these are the ground rules we would like to, each of us to abide by.
14 years later.
14 years later. And she was enormously receptive.
Great.
More than willing to do that. And we slowly but surely rebuilt the relationship till at the point of death, she told me how much she loved me. And she was so grateful that I had married her son.
That's wonderful.
And that is a very, very big change. I didn't hate her anymore. I started looking for the lessons. I asked her, you lived 90 years. Tell me the things you learned. Tell me about your life. And we developed a friendship. Was she ever my best friend? No. Mm-hmm. We developed a grudging respect for each other so that we may very well meet in another lifetime, because karma will test you to see, did you really get that lesson? Uh-huh. But I like to think that in the next time I see her, I will be able to hug her with a genuine affection. And so this lifetime, 3 people made large karmic steps on their spiritual path because we changed that karmic path, because everybody contributed, everybody met each other halfway. Now, it was huge for us.
That is huge.
It's really, really huge. So let me offer you another scenario. If you are married, could be man or woman, if you are married to someone who abuses you, and if it could be a partner, if your partner, however it works, is abusing you, and you continue to allow the abuse by not leaving, you incur worse karma.
If you continue because you're continuing the karma, it's almost as if you're allowing the karma to continue the momentum.
Exactly. When you, actually the abused person, have the power to stop the abuse by leaving, by saying, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. Because and this is why I didn't speak to my mother-in-law for 14 years, because every time I had an encounter, it was negative. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm looking at all the negative karma I'm incurring because I'm being mean and nasty to this person. Mm-hmm. That isn't who I wanted to be. So if I don't have contact, then that's a factor in mitigation in karma. It's a factor in mitigation.
Could you explain that a little more? What does that mean?
In other words, I haven't resolved the problem, but I haven't incurred worse karma by perpetuating the anger.
Okay, so you put it on pause.
I put it on pause, so you can't take it back if you say really mean things. Mm-hmm. And so by saying, let's stop this, I can't do this, until I could work through it. And she realized that I wasn't going to put up with it. I didn't allow her to abuse me, which stopped the karma she was incurring.
Okay.
And I this is a super powerful example.
It is.
It meant that my husband wasn't caught in the middle anymore. Because if you love both sides, how do you choose? Are you disloyal to your mother, or are you disloyal to your wife? I mean, it's enough to make you go nuts.
Oh, yeah.
And in that example, I put on pause the level of karma between us. Once I resumed it, now we're starting to reverse some of the negativity in the karma. We're starting to push it back. We're starting to heal the karmic paths that have been joined together by marriage. Mm-hmm. And that was a very big step. Not all families can do that. I'm simply saying, in this case, we were able to do that. If you have a marriage of whatever kind, or a relationship of whether it could be a sibling too, mm-hmm. and that sibling or neighbor or boss is abusing you, and you continue to allow the abuse, the abuser continues to incur the negative karma by abusing you, but yours is worse because you allowed it.
Wow.
Is this making any sense?
It is making sense.
So I want to make sure that that's clear for people, because it's not easy.
So to make sure I'm having some clarity right here. So the way I'm seeing it is that everyone's playing a role, and the role that we're playing, the one who is the one, well, I guess everyone's experiencing it, but the one has it or feels that it's worse for them that's the biggest lesson to learn as compared to the one instigating it?
Yes. And again, karma, not wasting energy. This is only about power.
Oh,
The abuser feels they have absolute power over the abused.
Mhm.
The abused feels like they are powerless. The lesson is the most powerful person is the abused person because they can stop it.
Wow, that's really amazing. So
Even though they think they can't, this is about finding the deepest level of moral and emotional and spiritual courage you could ever know.
Which is why they say get your power back. Take your power back.
Take your power back. And they don't mean by, guns and weapons.
Right.
It's finding out who you really are. Who do you want to be?
So the way that you're explaining karma is not the way that we learn in Buddhism at all, actually. So this is a complete different perspective, and I love this perspective. So yeah, prior to us recording right now, I was briefly discussing backstage with you some of the things that I've gone through physically with surgeries and this rare genetic disease and these incredible scars that I have all over my body. And sometimes I wonder what we learn in Buddhism is equal physical, whatever you've incurred physically in your life, emotionally or even mentally, is equal to what you've done to somebody either in this life or in a past life. So how do you feel? How do you see that being true or not true?
I have also studied levels of Buddhism. I have not spent years at it. I don't want to presume such a thing, which would be insulting to those who are true Buddhists. I am not.
Yes, thank you.
I have a deep and abiding respect for the Buddhist tradition. It is an amazing tradition.
It is.
And they are going for a very, very literal translation of karma, for lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm.
But it's more, I would offer a different perspective that perhaps it's slightly more complicated than that. It has to do with past lives. And you can't play out all your karma in one life. That's why winning the lottery is not always a good thing. That probably is another different question. But what I would offer when it comes to all the physicality, sometimes the soul wants to experience certain things, even though you might not remember that you wanted that experience.
Yeah.
Because it opens up the heart of compassion. And when that happens, if you take the pain that you have and then you send a prayer to the world for anyone else experiencing this pain, you send a prayer of healing to those people for all the pain you have experienced. You use the power of your pain to send healing to anyone who's experiencing this pain or this scarring or this trauma. You're sending it out. There's a wonderful book called A Course in Miracles, which is all about atonement. Mm-hmm. And people think atonement has to do because somebody did something bad and now they have to atone for it and do something good. But it's even more complicated than that. Sometimes the soul wants to experience things that in your wildest dreams you would think, why would you choose that? Well, we come here for the experience of certain events and traumas. Mm-hmm. No one leads a life without traumas. I mean, I have a sibling that's had like 25 or 30 surgeries, including a double transplant. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine that.
Right.
And, we have had this discussion. Why did this happen? And, I'm like the Wizard of Oz. I don't have all the answers. Sure. What I can tell you is that when you translate what's happened to you and transmute your pain into prayer for anyone else suffering,
I love that.
then you actually follow the Buddhist tradition of always sending out love. I would suppose it's a facet of the Bodhisattva, so that you are transmuting your pain
into compassion.
Into compassion for all those who are suffering. I don't have to experience an earthquake to have deep and abiding compassion for the Turkish people living on the street.
Oh yeah.
Who are terrified to walk into a building. I have a friend who lives there. They can't live in their building anymore. And they didn't have an earthquake where they are in Izmir. And life is going to happen to people because it's the experience of being in a mortal body. It's what you do with that experience that determines all your future days. And your experience with medical personnel, procedures, how people treat you are huge experiences.
Yeah.
It's a huge body of knowledge you're carrying. Maybe you're not conscious of. It's caused you to be so much more knowledgeable about your own body than you ever thought possible. You've probably gained a new respect for the body's ability to heal. How many different surgeries?
Right.
And perhaps it's awakened in you a gratitude for a body that can take this level of trauma and still heal.
Tina, it's so funny you say those exact words, because a podcast that I just did, I recorded a couple weeks ago. I talked about what I went through losing my urinary bladder and how it's so rare and unheard of. Have you ever met anyone that's lost their urinary bladder?
I
sure haven't. Yeah, exactly. And I was 33 when it happened. But the podcast, I basically said, I went from grief to gratitude. And so I just realized the amount of life that I gained, but it's been a beautiful journey nonetheless. So you're right on point with that.
And that shifts your karmic path in a way you wouldn't have thought of.
Yes.
It just shifts it. It helps people to understand it. I wrote 3 books. The first one was The Lightworker's Guide to Everyday Karma, because I wanted people to take it out of this, karma is, a BITCH, or, what goes around comes around, that kind of thing. I wanted it to be so ordinary. And one of my favorite, there's 52 different, one for every week, 52 episodes of how karma works. One of my very favorite ones is car karma. How you take care of your car earns a unique form of karma. And
how so?
Well, my oldest son was a master mechanic for BMW and a Rolls-Royce mechanic. And now he works for a custom shop. So he fixes everything. But he used to tell me that as soon as a car pulled in, he could tell whether or not the person loved or hated the car. If it's trashed inside, if the trunk is filthy, if the car is just a disaster, if there's no organization inside of it, and then the person, it's just a hunk of metal.
Sure, at that point.
But metal has vibration. Yeah. Everything on earth vibrates. If you go out to your car and say, this piece of SHIT, oh, this is a terrible car. God, why did I buy this car? But I had a BMW 528. It came off a lease. I had that car 20 years, ran like a champ. Having a son who can fix a BMW is amazing. Oh yeah,
I bet that's nice.
But he said, even that, he said the car did better than it should ever have run. And it was actually sold to a collector when we left California. And it needed nothing when it was sold. It was in amazing shape. And so I loved the car. Every time I got in the car, I just filled the car with how much I love the car. Well, the frequency of love is a high frequency. If you fill your home, your children, your partner, your spouse, your mate, and your car or your equipment with that same love and attention, change the oil, put air in the tire,
Keep
change
it
the
clean,
filter,
vacuum it.
clean, love your car, your number of repairs of your car will drop dramatically. I mean, my son used to say, we had this car in today, and man, this owner just hates this car. Oh my gosh. Car doesn't want to go back. Car just doesn't want to go back. And, what do I do? And I said, well, I don't think you have much choice. The person hated the car so much that they just walked in as they were handing her the keys. And she said, I just can't stand this car. I don't want it anymore. Get me a new car.
Wow.
So, but the frequency of the car had changed because it received attention. And she couldn't abuse it anymore. Sometimes people abuse not just other people, but animals and things.
Mm-hmm.
Someone will say, oh, you're really hard on fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm.
So you're earning the karma of all those repairs.
That makes sense.
I mean, it's kind of a different way of looking at it.
That's a beautiful way of looking at it, actually. It makes perfect sense to me.
There was a very, very fascinating story of a woman who had a 240Z, and she had this car, and she had a relationship with a dealership, and she took the car in for every maintenance. They said she changed everything, she kept it up, she kept it garage, she kept it clean, and that dealership could document that the car had 600,000 original miles on the engine.
What?
So what is the karma of that? Nissan was so impressed with this example of care that they offered to give her any new car on the lot if she would basically trade this 600,000 mile engine car.
And she didn't want to, huh?
And she did. She got a brand new car out of it. So all of the money she put into the car came back to her.
Wow.
What an astonishing
That's incredible.
example. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's beautiful karma right there.
There you go. So in that case, karma wasn't, it was beautiful. It was absolutely, and she's beaming. And so she'll take great care of this one too.
Tina, what about other types of karma, such as, let's say we have soul contracts to complete in this life, and going back to dysfunctional relationships. So we started the show. What if you're in a dysfunctional relationship, hypothetically, and you end up just leaving the relationship and not working through that negative karma? I mean, what kind of repercussions are there in that case?
That's why I wrote a book called Soul Evolution, Past Lives and Karmic Ties. You have a contract to come in and work something out with this person.
Mm-hmm.
As my example, I had a contract to come in and work it out with my husband and my mother-in-law. Mm-hmm. And it was very difficult. I'm not going to sit here and say it was easy. Mm-hmm. And like the lady who was married to the guy that looked like the Old Spice commercial, she worked really hard to get him to work it out, but he didn't choose to do that. He didn't want to work it out. He didn't want to make any changes. In that situation, she fulfilled her contract. There was no place left for her to go. Mm-hmm. And so she can move on. He will have that same contract with someone else. And sometimes you have a contract that is, shall we say, overly ambitious. You're just sure this time you're going to survive this brutal family, but you are beaten to death, or you are beaten into mental retardation. Mm. Your soul contract didn't work. Something else is going to happen now. And that's what I mean. There are many factors in mitigation. Mm-hmm. Things happen that you hadn't anticipated when the contract was made. Now, if the person has a soul mission, which is different from a soul contract or purpose, sometimes a soul purpose is to live through childhood because they're so horrific. Mm-hmm. And I've just a plethora of clients that have that problem. How do you live through the abuses of terrible parents?
Right.
And if you live through it and then you try to build your life back and you don't take your own life, because an awful lot of people do. They can't handle what happened to them, especially if there's incest involved or
Right.
rape. I mean, these people are deserving of enormous compassion. And karma is very, very compassionate. And I want to make sure that that is pointed out.
Yes, please.
Even though sometimes when you're suffering, it doesn't seem that way.
Right.
And I hear a lot of people say, well, God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Well, I never quite understood what that meant.
Right.
If you come in and you have a difficult situation, and you do, and your conscience is clear, you've done everything you could to make the situation better and to move forward as best you can, then you come up against two spiritual laws. The first one is you cannot want something for another person that person does not want for themselves. Okay. I'll repeat that. You cannot want something for another person that person doesn't want for themselves.
Okay.
The second one is you cannot want something from another person that person has no capacity to give you. If that person can't give you what you want, or you want something from this person, but maybe they don't have the mental capacity, maybe they were damaged as a child, maybe that's not something they want to do. And when you come face to face with those two things, you have to then look back and go, then I've done everything I can. I've done the best I can with the situation, and there's nothing else I can do. Because sometimes the karma between two people is over. We see this in divorce. You know how you see people who go, we just sort of fell out of love with each other and we divorced and we went on our way. Those happen. I've known of several. And the karma between them was over. But that happens with your job. I was in the Navy 20 years. I was offered major command. They offered me all 14, my choice of all 14 major commander commands for women through anywhere in the world I wanted. They said, take your pick. I thought, wow, I was really, really, really honored. Sure. And I said, I'm sorry, it's over. My time in the Navy's done. I can feel it. The karmic clock has said, it's done. And by my leaving, that will open the door for someone else to get that same fabulous, super honored choice. But it's time for me to do something else now. And if, let's say that you got fired from a job, let's say that you had to leave a job because it was untenable. Maybe the karma of that situation was over. Maybe your leaving will shift something for someone else. Makes a huge difference.
It really does.
And there's another element of karma, and that has to do with children, that I think is really, really important, right? It's always been important. It's not whether it's right now. There's never been a moment it wasn't important. What you do with your children at an early age is one of the most classic examples of karma coming back to you. If you have a 2-year-old and you're not disciplining that 2-year-old, and they run, put their fingers in a light socket, which most of them today have safety. You can't electrocute yourself, or don't put your hand on the stove, or don't start screaming in a restaurant. But you hear them say, no, we don't do that. That kid is not going to believe you.
Right.
You can be a strong parent without beating your kid up.
Sure.
And if you give them a strong sense of values, if you love them with all your heart, I saw something recently that said you can't love a child too much, especially a small child. They need all those hugs and the touching and the holding. And they need the gentle leadership, and they need you to say no. You have to love your child enough to say no, because the parent who doesn't looks around in horror at their 15-year-old who is a nightmare for them. And they can't figure out where they went wrong. And that karma comes back to you with a child very, very quickly. Whereas if you provide steady, consistent leadership, a good schedule for your children, then you end up with a child who's calm, who knows the rules, who uses courtesy, is welcome anywhere. You're telling your child, you're creating a reality. You're telling your child, you're a wonderful person. I'm really proud of you. Or let's look at what didn't work in this situation, or why did this happen? What can we learn from it? Or what you did was wrong here, and this is why. Then you're building a strong human being. And you accept the child for who and what they are, and you love them no matter what. And when you do that, it's amazing.
Right now, as you're saying this, I just remember there's a time where I was at a supermarket, and I think it was like a 2-year-old mother was holding a 2-year-old, and I don't know what the baby wanted, but he was hitting his mom in the face, and she was allowing it. And I couldn't help but just look away, and it did not feel right seeing that, and something felt very wrong about that. And I wonder where something like that occurs. I mean, that's the mother's karma in that case, or is it the kid's karma, or both of them?
This is about 98% the mom.
And her allowing her 2-year-old to be smacking her in the face because he wanted candy and didn't get it. I mean, she needs to set that boundary and fix that karma and say this, you can't do that, or that's wrong. And just kind of, otherwise it's going to keep coming back to her.
Well, by the time you get to the point where a child is hitting you in the face, kicking you, biting you, doing really horrible things, they're all demands for attention for a very powerful reason. If you are not the strong figure, that child feels afraid all the time. If you won't stand up to a 2-year-old, you're certainly not going to stand up to anybody else if something happens to them. You've created a fearful child.
Whoa.
And
that
so
makes sense.
You're angry at that mother.
Yeah, I don't learn this in psychology.
Well, I minored in psychology and I minored in sociology. So I study those things too. And I had 2 children. I actually have 3 children. We adopted a teenager when he was 17. And everybody goes through the terrible twos. They're called that because that's your opportunity to set boundaries. And if you have a 2-year-old that is throwing a tantrum and they do the lip baby routine, I mean, my daughter used to do that. She would lay on the floor and she would pound her feet and scream and yell. And I would look down on her and I'd say, is that the best you can possibly do? And so she would just go at it. And I go, I'm just not impressed. Scream and yell harder. I'm just not impressed. And she would completely exhaust herself. And then she'd sit back and she'd start laughing. She did that twice. She'd do it again. I didn't get mad. I didn't show emotion. Yeah. I just wasn't, she wasn't in a store. If she had been in a store, I would have grabbed my purse, my kid, and left the cart and gone to the car and had a heart-to-heart where you put your hands on the child's face and you get down on their level and you look in their face and you change your voice. This behavior will not be tolerated. You will stop it right now. When you change your voice, you get
you have their full attention.
You have their full attention. This will stop. And no parent escapes this. No parent, and that is the lesson of parenting. Your children are your opportunity. It's like people who have dogs and they let their dogs jump up on you. I'm 5'1". Somebody lets their pit bull, if they release a pit bull, I have this feeling of terror run through me. I don't know what that dog's going to do. Oh, they're just the sweetest thing. It could be a Doberman. My neighbor's German Shepherd was taking a walk, comes right up, and the dog was so black. I thought it was a bear because I live in the country. We have black bears up here. I was terrified.
Yeah.
That was unusual for that family. That has never happened again. But what I'm saying is, whether it's a child, a situation, and it's a military thing for me, what's your authority? You don't have to beat people up. You don't have to be abusive. You don't have to beat your kids. That's what timeout is for. You have to be consistent. If the answer is no, I didn't allow sleepovers. I had one too many clients who were molested during a sleepover.
Oh yeah, I've heard it too many times.
Many, many times, and well, I didn't want to hurt somebody's feelings. It's like, no, that's my rule. I don't care who it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I had situations where if you, as a child reaches 7 or 8 or 9, you expect them to keep their word. There's a lot of karma that goes with that.
Yes.
Because as an adult, don't you want other adults to keep their word? Well, how do you establish that?
Right.
I had a situation with my daughter who was supposed to go to a birthday party, and I had to leave the house. And so my son was looking after her. And I said, when I come back, you have to have your hair washed. You have to be dressed and the gift wrapped. Look at me. Tell me you know that you have to do that. Yes, Mom, I know. I said, because if you don't have that done, you aren't going to the party. Yes, Mom. So I get back and none of that's done. So I didn't say anything. I went over, I called the mom and I said, we've had a situation. She isn't coming.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had a heart-to-heart with my daughter. She will never forget. I did not raise my voice, but you wouldn't have wanted to be there. Mm-hmm. She never did that again. And she still remembers that. So you have to keep your word to a child. If somebody says, oh, they're so cute, I can't say no. I'm sorry. You aren't keeping your child safe. You're just not.
Right. I love that. The different ways karma can affect people of all ages.
Right.
You said something earlier. You said there's a difference between life purpose versus life mission. And what is the difference there?
A person who comes in with a life purpose, sometimes it's just to get through day to day, because many times they died early. An awful lot of people were cannon fodder. That's a horrible thing to say. Or they died as slaves, they died as prisoners, they died in armies and wars, or they starved to death. Mm-hmm. Most people have never lived this long, thinking about it. But some people come in with a life mission, and that means that they have more to do. Maybe they're changing the way somebody does business. Maybe they are a crusader to change a law. Maybe they have become an advocate for children. Maybe I'll use a very obvious example, which is Princess Diana. Mortal person, not educated. She didn't go to college. She got out of high school. She had a lot of emotional problems herself. She's in a situation where she feels like she's way in over her head. Mm-hmm. And her purpose is, she didn't even know what her purpose was. Now she's in this astonishing situation on the world stage. So she could have curled up in a ball, which she probably did a couple times. And then she went out and she held the hands of AIDS patients. And she went to hospitals and she did things that weren't politically correct. She opened the heart of compassion and she made it important to be compassionate. And she changed the face of a monarchy.
She did.
It will never be the same. And then when she wasn't royal anymore, she took on landmine issues. So she went from barely having a sole purpose to taking on a soul mission on a massive level. After she died, Queen Noor of Jordan took over the landmine issue. She was King Hussein's wife. And then after the king died, Queen Noor faded into the background, the king and queen of Jordan. So if you look at people who changed the world, and some of them did it in a pretty horrible way, and some of them did terrible things, and some of them did amazing things. As an example, Andrew Carnegie, one of the richest men who ever lived on earth at the time he was alive. And he did some things that were so horrific in the way he made his money. And all of a sudden, JP Morgan made Andrew Carnegie the wealthiest man alive. He bought some business. So he had this mission of being this industrialist, but he wasn't an industrialist anymore. So what did he do with the largest amount of money anybody had ever had? He created the library system in the United States. So he incurred all this awful karma. And then he took his money, and he could have done a lot of things with it, and he created all this positive karma. That's what I mean by factors and mitigation. We aren't all black and we aren't all white.
Okay.
He started out with building 1,400 libraries in the United States.
Whoa.
1,400 libraries. Then he packed 1,400 libraries with books.
That's amazing.
Well, what is the karma of all of the people, the echo effect of all of the people who use those libraries to educate themselves, to enhance themselves, and maybe they change the world, and he gets pieces of that karma back. So was he a good guy? Was he a bad guy? He was a guy. He made some bad choices. He made some astonishing choices with his power.
Right.
What will you do with who and what you are?
Mm-hmm.
That's what karma wants to know. And none of us have all the answers. It's just a perspective.
So right now you said something that struck me. You said he got pieces, some of the pieces of those karmic, I guess the karmic debt, if you want to say it that way, was kind of reversed or turned around. What does that do to the soul? I mean, from my understanding is there's parts of our soul that gets chipped away when we're doing a lot of negative actions, and if we're not fixing it. So if we're losing these imprints of our soul, or these pieces of our soul is being shedded, does that mean that we get part of our soul back?
That's an excellent question. It's a very complicated question. Our soul gets more shredded or shaved off with sexual, spiritual, mental, and physical abuse.
Okay.
Those are the biggest destroyers of souls as an aggregate. The actions we take, it's, I guess, an easier way to look at it as a karmic bank account. Sometimes you have debits and sometimes you have deposits. Mm-hmm. And that's what combines a soul. So was his soul intact when he died? Not for me to decide. But he earns the karma of the good deeds. He earns a little bit of the karma that echoes back to him of all of the good deeds that came from the people who used his libraries all over the country. And then I think he fostered, Carnegie Mellon Institute and Carnegie Hall, and supported the arts. And so there are an untold number of people that benefited from that money. If you have all that money, it's just certainly a really, really important thing to be. How much service can you be? Mm-hmm. That's what Joan Kroc tried to do in San Diego. And she, started out as a person who ended up married to Ray Kroc and started the McDonald's fortune, and then found ways in San Diego. She was the patron. She was sort of like the patron saint of San Diego, helping thousands and thousands and thousands of people. She built a hospice center so people could die with dignity. She helped people who were flooded. If you have the power to do something, you now have a mission that goes beyond just getting up every morning. What did you do to make the world a better place? And I'm looking at all the podcast hosts that I'm meeting, you and so many other really remarkable people who have this whole plethora of guests with different viewpoints.
Right.
Isn't that your mission? You're helping bring information to thousands and thousands of people who would never have heard this point of view. And it's a point of view. It doesn't mean it's the only one. It's a point of view. Right. That people can choose to accept or reject.
Exactly.
So as you're doing something that's more powerful than it can make a difference. Maybe somebody hears one of your podcasts and they make a very different choice. It's very positive. Let's use a slightly different example of a palm reader. There's a very famous story of a palmist in England, and he apparently was this brilliant guy who could look at your palm and tell you all these things. And so this guy comes in and he says, oh, what do you see? He says, oh, you've been working and working on something, but tonight you're going to be successful.
Mhm.
And the guy says, oh, thank you so much. And the guy went home and he successfully killed himself.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. So the question is, what was the karma of the palm reader?
Good question.
It's a really, really important
Yes,
question.
yes.
And why didn't the palm reader see in this guy's hand that he was going to kill himself? Because no psychic gets to see 100%. I don't care who you are. You don't get to see 100%. And that palm reader left fortune telling forever because he felt responsible for the man's death.
That I can imagine it's an awful feeling.
Yeah. Interesting.
So how does karma work then?
Well, telling fortunes, flipping cards, runes, I don't care, whatever you're doing, angel cards, they're all the same. You're connecting to something and you don't know really who's there. So when you make that connection, you're gambling. And you're not just gambling with yourself, you're gambling with the lives of other people on a variety of levels. And you can be hurting them dramatically. And yes, it incurs negative karma. There's not that many tarot card readers that are wealthy because those beings on the other side, they know karmic law too. They can take their pound of flesh from you whenever they want. Your relatives are sick, your cat is sick, you're sick. All of these things can happen. It comes back, unfortunately, not in a good way. But that palm reader was shaken for the rest of his life. He just couldn't do it anymore. He said it was a terrible thing to do.
What if palm readers or tarot readers or oracle readers, what if they set intentions prior to their reading to only do good for the good of mankind and set a different intention rather than just going in it and blindly, I guess?
Well,
Don't intentions set a whole other motion?
not when it comes to that.
Okay.
It doesn't matter what your intention is. If you are doing those things, you are hearing something from the other side. And without realizing it, you're becoming someone else's puppet in a fourth dimension. Even if you think you're doing the right thing. What happens is, in the great teachings of the world, the greatest world teachers didn't do Ouija, tarot. They didn't read palms. They didn't cast runes or read tea leaves.
Mm-hmm.
They simply worked through the energies of each day. Because if you're going to someone to tell your future, you're trying to get a head start on everybody else. See, right. I know what's coming. The problem is that incurs its own karma. It's not just the card reader. And the reason it's so difficult is, like that palm reader, he didn't see 100%. He thought he was doing something positive. Oh, you're going to be successful. So if his intention was, I intend that whatever I tell them that the person is successful, that death would still have happened.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you think your intention is good is relative, and it is not something that is quantifiable. Christ didn't need tarot cards. Buddha doesn't need tarot cards.
True.
The great ones, they simply use the power of prayer and the largesse and the generosity and the love that lived within them.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to get a peek at the future.
Right.
Actually, there's so many signs about what's in the future that you don't need somebody to flip a card to tell you. And you also don't know who's behind the cards. It's like the Wizard of Oz, the guy behind the drape. It wasn't some great and mighty being. And the wizard himself wasn't a bad person. But in the case of someone they're using those tools, none of those are necessary on a spiritual path. They are not necessary.
Mm-hmm. So like Yeah, that's really interesting. So you could totally change your own karma or somebody else's karma because you really don't know what's on the other side of the veil.
You have no idea who is on the other side of the veil. And people say, well, I know it's this person. What due diligence did you perform?
Mm-hmm.
And an awful lot of psychics do work with beings on the other side.
Right.
But those beings are prohibited from telling anyone the future.
I see.
It's a gross violation of spiritual law because it affects that person's karmic path. They
Right.
make a different decision because of what you said.
Right.
It doesn't matter, even if your intention was of the highest order.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody successfully kills their wife tonight, how are you going to feel?
Awful.
Horrible. You can't get it back. Don't go there. It's not worth it.
I feel it. I feel it. So I have another question about karma. Here, I think this. I have time for one more question here. What if you're in a relationship with somebody, or I mean, it could be friendship or partnership or husband, wife, and you're in the middle of learning a karmic lesson and they pass away before you can complete that karmic lesson. What happens then?
If you got more of it than you thought, then the lesson's complete. If you didn't fully get the lesson, someone else will be placed in your path so that you can complete the lesson.
I see. I see. I see. Okay.
Just like if you didn't come face to face with a bully at the time, another one will happen. And what happens with karma is it keeps presenting lessons over and over and over until you get it. The problem is the lessons get harder. They don't get easier. The bully gets worse. It doesn't get easier. So if you are confronted with a lesson and you walk away from it or you can't face it, the next time it will be magnified. Not because I say so. It's just how it works.
That makes sense. Tina, this has been amazing. I've learned so much. I always learn so much from you.
Oh,
thanks so much, everybody, for tuning into Little Less Fear podcast. This is Tina Erwin. Tina, how can our viewers, the watchers, and the listeners find you if they need to get a hold of you or anything else?
I am available at ghosthelpers.com. You can contact me at contact@ghosthelpers.com. And my books are available on Amazon, and they're also available on ghosthelpers.com with links to Amazon, and 6 out of the 8 are audiobooks. Yay.
Incredible. Yeah, super yay right there.
Yeah.
Tina Erwin, everybody, on a Little Less Fear podcast. Incredible topic on karma here. Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom light. It blows me away, and I feel forever blessed by your presence. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's an honor, really. Thank you, Tina.
You're welcome.